Right, let's start. Good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome to the third deep dive of this series on child labor. Today, we will speak about implementing functional grievance and remediation procedures for child labor cases. Next slide, please, Sandra. The webinar is recording. The slides as well as the recording will be made available after the webinar. And we will take the questions at the end. So please make sure to write your questions in the chat during the webinar and the presentation. So as said, today is the third webinar of our deep dive series. Just a reminder, so the series is a collaboration between SECO, Save the Children, the Center for Child Rights and Business, and the Global Compact Network Switzerland and Liechtenstein. We already had two webinars, one in 24 on identifying and assessing child labor risks and impact, and one in February on engaging with stakeholders on child labor. Please be aware that these webinars have been recorded. So in case you were not attending those webinars, you have the possibility to receive them as well as the slides. So please make sure you contact us, or we will put them online anyway in the upcoming time. So we will have the last webinar of the series in May, which will be about understanding the impact of organizations and companies on children's rights beyond child labor. Next slide, please. Today, we have the big pleasure to welcome Sandra Groth from Save the Children Switzerland. She's Corporate Partnership Manager, Lead Child Rights and Business. We have CTO Malika. She is Vice President, Services and Products at the Center for Child Rights and Business. She is based in Indonesia. And we have Dayang Norisan Jainal. She's Executive Director at Humana Child Aid Society, Sabah, and based in Malaysia. So I would like to thank you all three, first of all, for being with us today, and for you being very far away from Switzerland. Thank you so much for joining, even in the evening hours. Now I just would like to show what we're gonna discuss today. So we'll have Sandra setting the context with some definitions and perspectives on the challenges, etc. We will have Siri speaking about building effective and accessible grievance and remediation mechanism for children. And finally, a case study by Dayang on grassroots perspective on child responsive grievance and remediation, and a project called My Voice Project in palm oil sector in Malaysia. And then we will end up with the role of companies and local communities, and we will take your questions. We have planned a half hour for the questions, so really feel free to ask everything you would like to dig deeper into or discuss at the end of the webinar. So with that, I will hand over to Sandra. Right?
Yes. Thank you, Alice. Hopefully my computer will also do so. Yeah. Thanks a lot. As mentioned, I'm Sandra, working at Save the Children Switzerland, and it's my pleasure to give you a bit more context on the statutory framework of both grievance mechanism and remediation. So let's have a quick look on the OECD guidelines first. And I'm sure all of you are familiar with that due diligence process that you can see on the right-hand side. Within the OECD guidelines, it's clearly stated that enterprises who have caused or at least contributed to an adverse impact should provide for remediation. And in order to provide access to these processes, they are encouraged to implement so-called operational level grievance mechanism. This is a specific type of grievance mechanism through which individuals or also groups can raise their concerns about the impact in enterprise has on them when it comes to human rights or also environmental effects. And those OGMs, operational level grievance mechanism, need to meet specific core criteria with regard to legitimacy, accessibility, predictability, transparency. They should be based on dialogue and engagement. So you can find some criteria and minimum requirements within the OECD guidelines. These mechanisms can be both administered by the enterprise alone or also in a collaboration with other stakeholders or as part of a multi-stakeholder initiative. However, they should not be used to undermine the role of trade unions when it comes to addressing labor-related disputes or also prelude access to judicial or non-judicial grievance mechanism. So it's something on top and shouldn't preclude access to other mechanisms. And how are now the remediation and the grievance fit into the due diligence process is what we try to show here, because the grievance mechanism is part of that identify and assess human rights risk process step. It's one method of identifying risk beside risk assessments or audits or other monitoring schemes. Grievance mechanism are reporting channels that provide the rights holders and their representatives a way to report their concerns and to access a remedy. So in remediation, besides mitigation and prevention being a core element of a due diligence process. And in order to have a proper functional remediation in place, it needs a transparent process for access. So a well-functioning remediation process is going to increase the trust in the grievance mechanism. A well-functioning grievance mechanism is benefiting the remediation process, and both of it is contributing to an improved transparency and a strengthened due diligence. So all three, grievances, remediation, transparency, are very closely interlinked and benefit from each other. So, but let's have a look into the legal framework. Looking into the Swiss environment, the ordinance on due diligence and transparency in relation to minerals and metals from conflict-affected areas and child labor. It does have an Article 14 on reporting procedures. So companies shall establish an early warning mechanism for risk identification and a reporting procedure that is documented. However, this reporting procedure does not include a remediation mechanism. So this is quite special about the Swiss law in comparison to other international due diligence legislation. If we look into the CSDDD, the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, being fully aware that there are currently lots of question marks when it comes to the CSDDD and this omnibus procedure. However, that directive does include both remediation as well as grievance mechanism as fundamental parts. Remediation describing means to restore the affected person, communities, or environment to a situation equivalent to the situation they would have been in had the actual adverse impact not occurred. So bringing back to zero somehow. And also the obligation for companies to provide the possibilities for persons and organizations to submit complaints directly to them. And that should be done in a fair, publicly available, accessible, predictable, transparent way. There's a need to inform the affected workers, the trade unions, the workers' representatives about these procedures. So there is a lot of this in the CSDDD, as well as in the OECD guidelines. And to make it even more complex, while this is already quite comprehensive, the devil is in the detail, because there are quite a lot of challenges when it comes on making or setting up procedures that are indeed accessible to vulnerable groups. Because many of these mechanisms might be designed without considering the local context or the people they are supposed to reach. The people might not be adequately informed about these feedback channels. They might be not available in the locations where the people live. They might not be inclusive for people with a low literacy level, or the vulnerable people might not really believe that their feedback will be treated confidentially, or that they will be believed or assisted. So there are a lot of questions that need to be answered before setting up and designing grievance and remediation mechanism. And how all this refers to children is put into place for child labor remediation. I'm very happy to hand over to Siri and Dayang to give you insight into the work on the ground.
Thank you, Sandra. I do really hope that I will be as responsive and having all the answers like Siri. Just kidding. However, thank you for that explanation, Sandra, and putting really on point issues on the legislation and so on. I think from my side now, which will be then continued by Dayang later on with the case study, is we want to really showcase to you our experience in looking at the OGM and also the access to remedy and when those two are interlinked together and what that means. Like, is that beneficial or are there some challenges, or how we can see OGM as a very valuable tools to be able to identify and address risk of child labor. In the next slide, we come up with like in what situation actually children and young people need access to grievance mechanism. Like often when we see grievance mechanism, these are only for adults, or union members, or like migrant communities working in certain agricultural supply chain. However, based on our experience at the center, these are the three types of situation where children will be needing access to grievance mechanism, right? One is when the children is engaged in child labor, including worst forms of child labor. This is from manufacturing to agriculture to also mining supply chain, including services. And the second scenario is on young workers. Young workers here meaning that they are above the minimum working age. Different country, different minimum age, but normally it's around 15. In China, it's 16. In Indonesia, it's also 15. India and Bangladesh, it's 14. But usually based on the ILO convention, it is set at 15, right? However, technically they're still children, but they already have the rights to do work, right? And these young workers end up in hazardous work conditions, meaning with job insecurity, that they are doing hazardous work, like in a very high platform or very dusty, very noisy environment, or using sharp tools, or they are exposed to extreme heat and weather changes, this kind of thing that makes them end up as a child labor as well. And last but not least is children also affected by the parents' working conditions. I've seen this, in China, for example, where many of the workers are migrants coming from the other provinces. So during the school holiday, when their children are not in school, the children often come visiting their parents in the destination location where their parents are working in the factories, because of the missing support related to childcare or child-friendly spaces, and there are no options of leaving these young children or children in general in the dormitory or in their rented room. They bring the children to the factory and expose the children with hazardous work as well. So this is just one of the many situations. We've seen this in rattan supply chain in Indonesia, for example. We've seen this in sugarcane supply chain in India. We've seen this in mint supply chain in India. There are so many situations, different commodities where these three scenarios are happening. Now, in the next slide, I want to also look into the OGMs. Why here we want to pitch that the operational grievance mechanisms that companies often put in place have these opportunities actually to identify and remediate child labor. We put 5 points on how it can be. One is that if we compare it to the judiciary approach or the state-based mechanisms, if you refer back to the UNGP, the pillar number 3, that includes both state-based grievance mechanism and also non-state-based grievance mechanism. So if we compare the two, the very nature of grievance mechanism by the companies is that they can be developed in a relatively informal, flexible, accessible, and more cost-effective way to address human rights concern, including child labor. In contrast, judicial remedial procedure that we've seen from the center and also many other organizations who's clearly providing providing assistance to victims of child labor or forced labor, they see judicial remedial procedure by the state often involve significant cost and resources and are largely dependent on the merits of the legal claim. Even if the merits of the legal claim are strong, the issue of child legal standing would likely pose an additional barrier, particularly in the cases where the responsible adults, in this case parents, compel the child to work. So it's very difficult for children to get justice through the judiciary approach. That's why we see OGM as, relatively more, allowing children to access justice better. Second, the non-judicial nature of OGM, which utilize negotiation, utilize mediation between the two parties, offer less intimidating environment for children. Before I worked for the center, I worked for IOM and dealing with lots of counter-trafficking cases where children, children victims of trafficking brought to the face of the court. It's very intimidating for them, the entire environment. However, OGM has that opportunity to provide a more friendly environment for the children to speak up and get justice. Third, we see that OGMs can actually bypass the traditional legal barriers to child participation in accessing justice and remediation. In this mechanism, what we mean is that there are issues with children where the responsible adult may not be able to represent the child in the judiciary mechanism. Yeah, the adult may not be possible to attend, and that can be a problem for children to access this justice. I think Dayang can add more later on during the case study sharing on how children in Sabah, Malaysia palm oil supply chain, many of them are migrants, nearly all, and many of them are undocumented or even stateless, which make it very difficult for them to access judiciary-based grievance mechanism by the state. The fourth one, if it is well designed, if the OGM is designed with putting children in consultation, as part of the engagement, how they can develop, like Sandra mentioned before, like their literacy rate, where they are located, how to make sure that the OGM can be brought closer to the user or the most vulnerable groups, then if it is well designed, we do think that it can provide valuable insight into the direct and indirect impact, including the root causes. Because we think that, if the a well-designed and well-implemented OGMs, these valuable insights can come from being able to identify issues and take active steps to prevent the adverse impact. So it's not just about, okay, getting the complaint in 7 days, report, response to the complaint and do investigation. Not just that, but really built, particularly relevant for remediating child labor, deep practice can then help provide necessary context and intervention points. So we will know why these children work in the first place. Is that because of the parents were not paid properly? Or is it because school holiday and children have nowhere to go? Or it's because clearly there is no education opportunities at all? So we can go down to the root causes if we implement OGMs good. And then last one is the integration to HRDD. I think everyone knows, Sandra touched on this in the beginning, that grievance mechanism is like the race assessment. If you go back to the OECD circle, it's just one out of the 6 steps in the OECD circle. However, if we integrate that in a broader HRDD process and incorporate a really robust feedback loop, it can offer us multiple advantages. For example, early identification of systematic issues, like I mentioned just now. Or perhaps it's because really like this out of school children, stateless or undocumented, have really no access to school at all. That's why they come with their families, so this kind then we can address through the policy development by the companies. Then we can also see how we can mitigate the risk, how we can collaborate, stakeholder engagement to address the issue at scale, and so on and so forth. However, in the next slide, Sandra, if you can go to the next slide. Despite all the good points that I mentioned to you, how potentially good OGMs to identify and address child labor, again, from the center experience, we have been remediating over 1,000 cases of child labors across commodities globally, right? Of course, the cases reported to us is more than 1,000, but the cases that end up into a functional remediation program where the children are having their rights reinstated and the cost is being covered by the companies is only like 1,000, a little bit over 1,000. And we've seen that only 2 actually out of 1,000 cases that the center has handled since 2018 were reported through grievance mechanism. Most of the complaints or the reports that we got on child labor cases, either one coming from third-party experts like NGOs, CSOs, or mostly coming from the internal audit protocol of the buyers, right? So, but very little coming from the grievance mechanism. Just to share you, quite recently, we have a conversation with one of our client on their sexual harassment complaints happening in one of the factories, in Bangladesh. The way they got to know those complaints, not through the hotline, not through the formal complaint procedure, but it's by these workers reaching out to one of the auditor that came to that factory to do investigation. Then they reach out to him and inform that, so the grievance mechanism, somehow is still like having some pitfalls that make it shy away from being effective to identify and address child labor. And in the next slide, we put together, why then the grievance mechanism that the companies has, the common pitfalls. And there are 7 of those. I will not go into so much detail. If you put in the question box and you want to deep dive on it further, I can do that. We can engage in a question and answer. But these are the 7 things. One is the lack of specificity, which means that the grievance policy that the company has fail to differentiate between different types of grievances. That's why mostly we see in the grievance complaint, it's water leaking, or or something like the door is broken or the emergency door cannot be opened. This kind of report, which result then in a standard grievance process that is applied to all different of complaints. So the way a company addressing child labor is the same with how they are addressing water leakage or, like issue with water in the toilet, that kind of thing. So the lack of this tailored approach means that the complexities of child labor or forced labor or sexual harassment cannot be adequately identified or addressed. Second pitfall is the inadequate of child-centric focus. So child labor, if I can frame it, is often grouped under a general human rights umbrella, so not specific on child labor. So it's combined with the bigger human rights issue, which can then dilute the focus on the specific needs and sensitivities unique to children, right? Because as a result, then the remediation often lack of the child-centric perspective, right? Because children have their special needs and the best interest of the child. And the third is the policy implementation gap, where companies establish specific policies for child labor remediation. However, the implementation is still lacking. So many companies are having their remediation component in their policy, but when it comes to implementation, it's very difficult to do so. We found lots of suppliers are made responsible for remediation. So the responsibility of remediating cases is being pushed to the deeper supply chain. However, if we go back to the CS-triple-D that again Sandra mentioned, regardless of the proposal of omnibus that is ongoing right now, but CS-triple-D put emphasis on business model, right? It is clearly mentioned in the CS-triple-D on the business model, meaning how we are our responsible purchasing practice of the buyers. If that impacting, like the suppliers and so on, then they also have a role to play to support the suppliers. Let's go together. Let's address this remediation, which, in our experience, the typical result is that suppliers tasked with remediation frequently resort to minimalistic solutions, like just providing small cash compensation or enrolling the children to unsuitable programs at all, without considering the child situation, right? Next one is on the inappropriate measures by the suppliers. We also observe at the center that placing remedial responsibility on suppliers often results in suppliers forcing the children to undergo inappropriate medical checks to determine the child's age. Like I've seen this in Bangladesh, how they are using, they're measuring the hand of the worker, or they are using the dental examination, which ILO has mentioned as unreliable way of deciding someone's age. So the factory or the suppliers does not know how to use corroborative questions to check the age of the child, so they're using this measure that is not reliable and only creating stress to the child. And then the next one is on more leaning on consequences over remediation itself. Like because we've reviewed lots of child labor policies, not only by the buyers, but also by the suppliers, we see that the policy tend to emphasize the consequences of violating child labor code of conduct rather than, really setting clearly the steps that the companies need to take for remedial action. So this approach then can only prioritize mitigating risk to the business over addressing the risk to the child or the people. And the sixth one is neglecting the root causes, where we see grievance mechanism often fail to look into the root causes of child labor. Quite contrary with what I mentioned in the previous slide, that the OGM has this opportunity to actually look into the root causes if done properly. If it's not done properly, going back to number one here, lack of specificity, it will only, look at the superficial report, will not go into detail to the root causes. Last but not least is insufficient resources, which is very self-explanatory, where everyone, this is also my experience with the center. There are so many brands and buyer are so ready to put money to do risk assessment, human rights impact assessment, and so on. But once the assessment done and we come up with recommendations, very likely they will say, oh, we'll just do this next year, because we only have this money left. This is where I see many companies ready to put, to do risk assessment, but they do not put money in the bucket to follow up the results of the assessment. And in the next slide, before I pass it to Dayang, then just very quickly, then what are the requirements then for investigating and remediating child labor? as shaped by the international standards. Yeah. If we are looking, then okay, my company do have OGM, then how then my OGM can meet the requirements international by the international standards to investigate and remediating child labor. One is what we call as the investigative requirements. If we want to do a thorough investigation into child labor, we need to have a child-friendly protocols. We need to have a specially trained staff to do that. Collaboration with third-party expert. If you think that you don't have that requirements, you don't have the protocol, you don't have trained people to do that, then do not hesitate to reach out to third-party expert. Can be NGO, can be your implementing partners that you've used for your HRDD project, let's say, or other child welfare expert, that can really look into this topic. And second is the robust HRDD process. I touched this a little bit in the beginning already on how the OGM then, if it is integrated into overall HRDD, then can be of value to identify and remediate child labor. Again, here we repeat it again that addressing child labor within the global supply chains requires moving beyond traditional audits, right? Moving beyond traditional audits to also implement robust human rights due diligence process, which involved value chain approach that identify, assess, mitigate the entire supply chain. So not only your premises, but also the upstream and also downstream stakeholders, meaning it's not only your subcontractors, sub-suppliers, raw material suppliers, and so on, but it's also the downstream one, like your transportation, your warehouses, your waste recycling, those entire chain of activity as described in the CS-DDD. Then the next one is the compliance with the new regulations. Sandra touched on this already. There are many. I think that the world is going to make this HRDD more mandatory, despite all of the pushback, all of the push forward. But we can see the trend in the past 2-3 years that the world is going to that direction of making this more mandatory. The next one is that collaboration with stakeholders in any HRDD discussion, any HRDD law, UNGP, this component of stakeholder engagement should happen throughout the process, right? It's so for us to be able to investigate, remediate child labor, we need to collaborate with a broad range of stakeholders. It can be NGOs, can be community leaders. In the case of Malaysia, Sabah palm oil is Humana, where Dayang is coming today. The next one is understanding the multifaceted harms. So for this context is that often child labor is not only child labor only, but there are lots of other harms happening. So it's quite complex for us to see that. And last but not least is the holistic approach to remediation, which includes, not only addressing the immediate needs, but also consider the long-term well-being of the children. For example, within the center, we utilize what we call as child labor rapid response services, which we assess the child situation, collaborate with the stakeholders, for example, like Humana or the other local collaborators, to develop a comprehensive remediation plan and provide solutions such as vocational school enrollment, financial support, and this also embodies commitment to the best interest of the child through ongoing monitoring and support. So it's not just we support and that's it, but it's from the beginning until the end. So if it's a 36 months remediation, then we'll be on that, step all the way from the beginning until the end, doing monitoring, doing support, troubleshooting. If there needs to be engagement with certain stakeholders that may risk the child labor remediation process, then we'll do that meeting. So that's very like a tailored individual remediation process. In the next slide, is that now, just want to go back again to the beginning. Then I will pass it to Dayang. Is that, so let us think again. Can we actually address child labor through OGM? That I believe that many of companies representative attending today have in their company. So in conclusion, what I just explained, compared to judicial remedial procedure, again, we do believe that OGM has the potential because it is flexible. It is a tailored remedies that children unique circumstances, like I mentioned, can be addressed. Only if the OGM provides opportunity for and engage with children in a meaningful way through the development, through the case handling, through the remediation implementation until the closing of the complaint, And if not like that, then I'm afraid the OGMs will remain ineffective in achieving their intended impact, which is to identify this kind of, like child labor, forced labor, sexual harassment issue, sexual abuse within the company supply chain. Now, I would like to invite Dayang, my dear friend based in Sabah, Malaysia, where you know that 85% of the global production of palm oil either coming from Indonesia or Malaysia. And for Malaysia in specific, Sabah is the biggest palm oil producer with high concentration of international buyers, including those coming from Swiss, sourcing from that place. So I'll pass it to Dayang now to share her experience as the executive director of Humana in preventing and remediating child labor in collaboration with the center. Dayang, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Riri. And hello, everyone. I'm Dayang Norisan, and I'm from Humana Child Aid Society Sabah. So I'm going to share about the case study that we are doing right now. It's about our collaboration with the centers through the My Voice project. So I just want to give a brief introduction about Humana Child Aid Society Sabah, so easier for you guys to understand what we are doing in Sabah, Malaysia specifically. So Humana is an NGO that working on preventing child labor in collaboration with palm oil companies since 1991. So initially, Humana started with the belief to prevent the child labor happen in the palm oil plantation. So we've been working very close with our companies, specifically for the palm oil plantation companies to prevent the child labor from happening in most of the palm oil plantation in Sabah. So founded in 1991, and we have 3 centers in Lahadatu. Our HQ is based in Lahadatu, Sabah. So, and it's fully supported by plantation companies. And currently we have like 32 plantation companies that working with us. So we are working based on trust by each other between our organization and with our stakeholders, meaning to say our plantation companies. So now we are having 118 Humana Learning Centers because how we are going to prevent the child labor from happening. We built a Humana Learning Centers where we could provide a basic education to our children, meaning to say the Humana children that live in the plantation area. So as what Riri have explained earlier, I think 85% of the children that studying in Humana is non-Malaysian students, which is they are undocumented. Most of them are from Indonesia and some of them are from Filipina. And some of them haven't got any documents yet. So this is the type of vulnerable children that we have in Humana Child Aid Society Sabah. So right now we have over than 10,500 students registered under Humana all over the Sabah. So what we do, as what I said, we offer the education. It's like a basic education, which is counting, writing, and reading. So when these children go to school, we believe that it could help a lot from these children from being child laborers because they spend less time in the plantation area because they go to the school. So study shows that over 50% of the plantation workers' children would end up in a child labor without education. Okay, because recently we have done a census, which is internally done by Humana. So we noticed that when the children didn't go to school, it shows that they didn't have anything to do and they prefer to work to fill in their times. So next, please. So how we are going to do about that one? So moving beyond the child labor preventions, since 1991, we are doing the prevention of the child labor. So we have step up our game actually when the center came up to us and introducing themselves and their plan for the child remediation model program. I think in 2 years ago, if I'm not mistaken, yeah, really. So okay, we have done a collaboration with the centers under the My Voice project. Okay, in last year, we have signed the agreement. So this is the three main parts that we've been focused on, and I think really could add up something, maybe if I'm missing out. Okay, the first one is departing from need to address child labor at scale. Okay, we try to figure out which area or potential risks that we can see or where we can help these children that exposed for the child labor case, because there are some children that there are lots of children that have been registered under Humana, but we believe there's a lot more children that haven't go to school in the plantation area. Okay. Next, we go to the focus on child labor risk in Malaysia's palm oil sector, because in Sabah, we have a policy where the Indonesian workers or the Filipino workers that work in the plantation area could bring their family coming inside Sabah and live with them. It's different. It's a bit different from the West Malaysia. Okay. So that's where it came, where Sabah have become one of the focus for the child labor risk in Malaysia, especially in palm oil sector. And next is our goal to facilitate and collaborative action among companies and solution providers to address child labor risk. Okay, I just want to highlight our stakeholders' effort in preventing the child labor from happening in their plantation. We've been doing a lot of work to prevent this child labor case from happening in their plantation. But I keep on thinking, before the remediation model come to Humana, I keep on thinking what happened if the child labor already happened in that plantation. What are we going to do? So when this remediation model come and it has been introduced to Humana, we've been working really hard because we really want to see, okay, we could help these children that have involved in the child labor issues. So there's a way for these children to be helped, and we can assist them so they can go out from the being a child laborer. So next, please. So this is a time frame that what we are going to do in the within the time frame that has been provided to us. So we've done the research and mapping, which is we have identified which area that has potential risk on the child labor. That is through our census also. And when we are doing this one, trust issue is a main important things that we can't forget when we are talking with our stakeholders, because it's a very sensitive issues and it will be giving a very big impact to their economy or their business side. So we've been doing the census very carefully, and the data and information are very private and confidential. So we won't be giving any sensitive other sensitive information to other outsiders for this one, because we really want to help our stakeholders in helping the child labor issues. So after the research and mapping, we go to the capacity building for lower tiers. Okay, because we have like during the collaboration, we have the focal points, community focal points, because we have in Humana, we have more than 388 teachers all over Sabah that teaching in our Humana Learning Centers. So they've become our community focal points where they can give information that we need, or if there's any potential risk or we are aware or worried about some child that might be involved in a child labor. So this is our community focal points. So they have also attended a training actually that has been organized by the centers through the My Voice project. So next after that, we go for the child rights focal points. After they've been trained, they know it's not like one time training, but it's like several trainings actually. They have to know what they should be doing when they are having this kind of potential risk case. So they know they have their own standard of procedure. They know the rules and regulation and what they should do. Okay. So after that, we go for the child labor remediation. So this one child labor remediation is the next step after we really identify and have enough details and information that ensure that these targeted children really involved in a child labor issue. So maybe Riri can add on for this one. Yeah.
Thanks, Dayang. I think this is also aligned with question from Thomas. I'm looking at the chat as well. How do the plantation owners react when children are moved to school versus plantation work? And how is this managed to get their engagement and commitment versus retaliation or side processes to get them back? So Dayang, please add on this. But in my to my knowledge, before we pilot the Child Rights Action Hub, Thomas, we do not document or heard from any organization in Sabah or Malaysia that a child labor has been remediated. So everyone that we spoke with during the landscape mapping, they said they've seen children working in Sabah in palm oil plantation. May not be at the big boys plantation, but can be in the, like in the smaller size sub-supplier plantation, which are still big, right? So that the remediation has never been documented at all. No one knows that a single child has ever been remediated properly, meaning their remediation means that their right is being reinstated, to before the violation happens. No one knows about it. That's why then having this Child Rights Action Hub becomes very important to fill in that gaps, right? So responding to your question, right now, I think Dayang, the children, they in your school, they might have experience of working before, but then they are now in school. However, they're being sent back to school, but it's never been a proper remediation process, from the beginning to the end they have ever experienced. Right, Daya?
Yeah, right. Agree with that, Riri.
Yeah.
So, like, usually when we found out there's maybe there are some children didn't go to school, being absent from their school, the teachers will go to the parents and check what really happened to the children actually, what are they doing and what makes them didn't go to school. So when we found out okay, the children are helping their parents during maybe because of it's a harvesting season and everything. So the teachers will try to persuade the parents to bring the children back to school actually. And we will talk with our plantation company on how it's going to.
No worries.
Sorry.
So
And because we need our plantation company to help them, the parents, to bring the children back to go to school. But so far, as what I have seen, there's no such remedial program, a proper remedial program as what we have found recently through our collaboration with the centers.
yeah. So, in the interest of the time, if we can move on to the next slide, I can also like put, like just circling back a little bit, right? So, how then we can develop OGMs that fit for children, learning from the case study that Dayang just shared with us, right? So, one is the meaningful stakeholder engagement. Dayang and Humana has spent so much time to really build the arguments with the plantation companies why it's important, to make sure that they provide access to education for the children, like that, because many of this situation of children end up in child labor situation because they're stateless, undocumented, hence they don't have access to the formal schooling system of Malaysia. Then they come up with this solution. And now like 30 plus companies have engaged Humana to actually, like really providing their expertise in child labor and providing child education, to solve the issue of children in the plantation working hazardous work. Second is identifying the root causes, right? I think that significant investment in time and resources is essential to identify the root causes of child labor, depending on the industry and the sector specific, of course, right? Like this process, I think should ideally be done in conjunction with the expert organization, like the center, like Humana, like Save the Children, who really is the front line to facilitate this knowledge sharing and to find the appropriate solutions to the kids. And then third, I think what we learned from the case study just now is on the commitments, and also prompt resolutions by the companies, right? The companies that Humana has been working with show their commitment to resolve the grievance of child labor, like in a really on the ground programmatic intervention way, like engaging Humana to provide school system, engaging the center to remediate the cases of child labor that they found in the supply chain. Last is the accessible contact points. This may not be reflected in the case study, but from our experience from the center, if we want to make sure the OGM will fit for children, is to establish and maintain and promote the contact points that are accessible to the children, the staff that are trained by professionals and located in an easy to reach safe place. There is a reason why the Center for the My Voice project is collaborating with Humana, because if you see palm oil plantation in Sabah, it's nearly impossible for me just walk in there, like, and they will open the gate and allow me to go in. There is no way we can do this. So the best way for us to build this, like grievance system, this to make sure it's accessible, is to select and train someone who's already inside, which is the teachers of Humana, that is being assigned in the different schools inside the plantation, right? And then last one is the, sorry, the fifth point is about the direct complaint channels. I do think now, and my experience also show that children cannot bring their complaint directly to the grievance mechanism. They either need to do it through trusted adults, their parents, their neighbors, their teachers, or a trade union or whoever. So there is this referral pathway that make children indirectly accessing grievance mechanism within the community or within the supply chain. So if then we can use this feature of direct complaint channel, it distinguishes non-judicial OGMs, of course, then it should be maximized in the design process to ensure the children's voice are heard and addressed, and they have this direct channel to report their complaints and get justice. And last but not least is the regular review and impact measurement. I think this is just last like a closing from me before I pass it back to Sandra, is that stronger due diligence may reveal more child labor cases, and it is okay. Like when you start looking for it, then you will find it. When you not looking for it, you don't do your due diligence, then you won't see the problems. But it is okay. If when you have the stronger due diligence in your supply chain, then there will be more child labor cases. But it making it crucial for the companies to also have remediation procedures and service providers in place. So when you start looking, when you start improving your due diligence, you have all the, like all the tools, all the support that you can have to solve that issue. So I think I will with that, then I will pass it back to Sandra.
Thank you, Riri. And thank you especially for emphasizing also on the last fact, which I think is a very important one. So these child labor cases exist anyway. It's just the question whether it's transparent to you. So don't shy away from introducing these procedures and deep diving into it, because the problem exists even if we don't see it. So better to have the proper mechanism in place. And before we come to an end for the webinar today, I just wanted to conclude a bit on the role and responsibility of companies, and also what role the local communities might have. And I guess many of these points we have already touched within the presentation of Riri and Dayang. Focusing on child labor remediation, there are some principles that should apply to that, which some of them have also been touched upon already. We strongly believe that it's crucial to remediate child labor, whether it's inside the law or not, in order to protect children's rights and to break this cycle of poverty that forces families to let the children work. If we don't invest into the remediation, we will not have a sustainable solution to the problem of child labor. And from a child rights perspective, very important to highlight that child rights should come first. It's more important than the commercial interest or any other consideration. Those should not be prioritized over children's well-being. So the company has a responsibility to create these policies, establish monitoring capacities, reflect on their business practices to ensure that they don't increase the risk of child labor, and to establish a remediation mechanism that ensures access to appropriate remedy. When doing remediation, make sure that it's tailored to the specific needs of each child and that it responds to the scale and severity of each child labor case. So, and look for the support you need by independent child rights experts. And make sure that if you establish this mechanism, that you have a look on what local stakeholders and local structures exist, which I could embed my activities into, and build on government processes if they are available. So the situation might be very different from country to country and supply chain to supply chain, but there might be structures to build up on. And when we talk about communities, this is somehow closing the loop to our webinar in February on stakeholder engagement, that by involving local stakeholders, involving the workers, the farmers, the community members, local NGOs, you can ensure that there's a better accessibility to your procedures, because it might be easier for rights holders to address their concerns if they can do so in a familiar structure and setup. Make sure that you are aware of cultural norms and barriers or power dynamics which might hinder people from raising their concerns, which you can address by involving or including the communities. You can improve the efficiency and speed of remediation, and also ensure that there is a shared responsibility and ownership by involving local stakeholders such as workers' representatives, community leaders, child protection committees, local NGOs, depending on what exists on the ground. If you still don't have enough on that topic, there are lots of resources. We only added a few here on the final slides for anyone still eager to read more about it. And that's it from our side, and looking forward to any questions. And thank you very much for attending.
Thank you so much, Sandra, Riri, Dayang. Thank you very much. That was extremely interesting. I have had a look at the chat. There has been a lot of activity there. also questions that have been answered right away in writing. So I will take up the questions that have not been answered yet. And depending on the time we still have, we could go back to some of the questions that received an answer in writing already. So the question from Olga, the last question from Olga about which OGM is it that the children could access. So you spoke about indirect, like OGM should be direct. The children should be able to directly put their grievance. So which system would they trust? Would it be the one from the plantation owners, or what would be a system that would work?
I think very quickly on that, learning from the case study that Dayang just put forward, this understanding where the children will be seeking help. So when you want, let's say, okay, take a step back. So when you try to develop your OGMs that will be able to be accessed by children or the most vulnerable groups in your supply chain, I'm sure you did your risk assessment first, so you know who are the vulnerable stakeholders within your supply chain. So the next step is making sure their voice is being counted when you develop the OGM. A simple questions, do an FGD, ask them if you do have problems. It's about let's not about child labor. If you have problems, let's say that you need to go to work and you don't know who can take care of your child, or questions like if someone is like treating you badly, then to whom you can report, who you trust that you will reach out and get help. These kind of questions in the beginning of designing your OGM will help a lot, because then you will hear from their perspective. We've done this exercise many times, but I think I just take an example from the 4 years ago when we did similar activity for a like a Swedish company sourcing natural fiber rattan from Indonesia. We did the same exercise for their raw material side of rattan. We asked the head of village, we asked the children, we asked the female rattan washer, we asked the male rattan harvester who go inside the forest that questions. If you have problem, any kind of problem, first we asked them what kind of problem you're facing on a day-to-day basis, and they said, oh, it's very hard to pay a school fee of the children. Second, no one is taking care of my child during school holiday. Any issues. And then we asked them, now think about those issues, who you can get help from if you're facing those issues. And they're trying to mapping it, or for this issue we asked here, to the conclusion that there are some limitation on the existing structure where they can get help, whether it's anonymity, or it's about resources, or it's about protocols that everyone should follow, this and that. Then we come to the conclusion that, okay, if we want to make sure the OGM will be effective, then we need to have someone locals who are educated and able to communicate the issue, and these people trust to be there in the community to raise the complaints, to raise the issues from the community. That's where then we come up with what we call as the bottom-up communication approach, where we select some community facilitators, only 4 of them actually for the entire village, but these 4 community facilitators are they're educated, they're young, so they are aged around like 21 to 25. They are young, they're educated, at least they can read and write, and they are either the daughter of a rattan worker in the past, or they themselves was historical child labor in the beginning, but they end up, with some education and can graduate from high school, so they can read and write, this kind of thing. Then after we set up and we trained them, like 3 years ago, we found 5 children in a child labor situation, and until now, 3 years later, the 5 children, only one child left where we haven't closed the remediation, but the others now have completed. And since then, we've never seen any child labor again in that village, because this community focal point, they always raise, if there are any complaints, any difficulties of the community, we set up a child-friendly spaces in collaboration with the head of village. So I think that would be I don't have a short answer to that, but bringing in the OGM closer to the most vulnerable group will be the solutions. And for you to do that is start with understanding what are their problems and where they get help. If they have problems, then you will be able to, like adapt that for your grievance mechanism.
Thank you so much. Sandra, you wanted to add something or no?
No,
Uh,
I didn't. No, I'm
Okay.
fine.
Great. Thank you so much, Riri. So the next question would be about, so I read the question. Would you have a list of local NGOs that we could contact if we wanted to conduct audits of our supply chain suppliers? And that could provide us with local support through the knowledge of regulations and practices and customs, and possibly share a template for conducting such audits or offer training on how to conduct an audit. This is a question that we get often from our participating companies when we say you need to engage with stakeholders on the ground at suppliers level, etc., is that they don't always know where to look for these NGOs or stakeholders on the ground. So I don't know who of you, Riri, I see you're unmuted. Yeah, do you have an answer?
I do actually for this. I think in one of my explanation just now that audit itself will not be, solving the issue, because as you know, audit is happening in your own premises only. Like if you are auditing your supplier, then it's just that supplier. It often doesn't include the lower tiers of your suppliers, the subcontractors of your suppliers, and they don't do community risk mapping during the audit. An audit is also happening like like only certain time, like either once in 3 years or once a year, so it's not a journey that you go with your supplier together. It's a bit different, not a bit, it's very different with responsible business conduct through the HRDD process. Like the human rights due diligence process is a circle, that you do it all the time. You embed that in how your company is operating, definitely beyond audit. So if the question now is that whether uh like local organization, definitely very quickly answer to that is the center is doing over 100 assessment, I think, if not more, globally across different commodities. So we practically can do this like anywhere in the world if you reach out to us. But beyond that, we also receive some questions from our clients, because there is this big trading companies where they are supplying to really big brands to the US and also Europe. They source from 4,000 factories across the globe, and every year they hire the center to do 10 assessment in their factory. And when we come up with our report, they compare it with their internal audit report, and they ask us, why could you, how can you found such cases and issues that our audit did not detect? They did this with us like 3 years, and then they've seen more problems from our report they didn't see from their audit. And based on that, we have this engagement, and we come up with what we call as audit tag along. So when they do their audit in 5 countries, India, China, Bangladesh, Cambodia, and Vietnam, we tag along with them. We observe how the auditors are actually doing this in the factory, right? And we come up with some very good feedback that they really appreciate. For one is that it's very minimal for them to converse with workers, while our assessment put really emphasis in conversation with workers. Second of all, they are looking at the checklist. So by the end of the day, they want to see how many checklists they completed. It's different with our assessment, where we put on the back of our head is to find evidence of child labor and forced labor. So the way we framing that is already different. And we come up with this solution to them, and we provided them training on how to strengthen their audit process to be able to capture child labor and forced labor. But what I can see, it needs training. It needs to understand how you are right now in your company doing audit, and then come up with some solution how you can improve that, really tailor-made, because the even internal audit from one company to the other company is very different, right? Yeah. So, but that's from my experience sharing.
Thank you so much for this explanation, Sandra.
Maybe, yeah, just a quick add-on to that. When it comes to stakeholders or local organizations to reach out to, unfortunately, at least to my knowledge, there's no ready-made database where you can just click in and have a full list of who to reach out to. However, talking to international NGOs might be one way of getting a better insight into the conditions on the ground. So this is why I edit my email address. Feel free to reach out, as we have a global presence in almost 120 countries. In those, mostly we are very well connected to the local structures, that at least we might be able to point you into the right direction. Or yeah, by collaborating with organizations such as the center, that can help you find the right local partner or facilitate a dialogue or do some trainings. Yeah, not the ready-made list that applies to all, but I think many organizations which would be willing and open to help and support.
Thank you. What about trade unions? Do you think they are also a good go-to partner on the ground to kind of understand the situation and maybe find out which NGO could be helpful? Sandra, maybe about trade union?
I have to admit, I don't really know. I think they're part of many of the programming work we do. So I would consider them as one of the local stakeholder groups worth reaching out to. But the situation of trade unions might be very different from country to country. So obviously there are countries where trade unions are not freely chosen, or where there's no freedom of association and collective bargaining. So I guess, again, we have to first map the stakeholder environment in a specific context and country to see who might be the best grassroots or organizations on the ground able to help.
Thank you. Now the same person was asking also for another list for point of contact or association, organizations, channels through which we can make our ethics line with a whistleblower available to report any breaches of child labor regulations, compliance with health and safety standards in the supply chain that may be observed at our suppliers. So I believe the question goes in the sense that are there other organizations that could be like taken into the loop and that they would report if they see something? Is that what you meant, Priscilla? Maybe you want to ask your question? Priscilla, are you here?
She commented yes in the chat.
Yes, I
Oh,
am.
all right.
Do you hear me?
Yes, we do.
Yes, okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Indeed, the question was on the side. Let's imagine a third party noticed something on a premises or in a mine extraction and would like to raise the point, and they know that this specific customer or third party currently works with this supplier. So how could they just ring the bell? And is there a way we could just share or make available our internal whistleblower channel, which is also available from outside the group, just to raise this concern?
Is any one of you wanting to answer to that, Riri or Sandra?
I'm not sure whether I fully understood the question as I was trying to read through your comment. So you do have a whistleblowing mechanism that you would like to share with a broader group or make better known. Is that correct?
Absolutely, locally, because we do not have we do not have entity everywhere across the world. However, we may work with a supplier which is not where we have our own operation for mining extraction, for instance. So we would buy raw material and nobody would know how to contact us directly. So we would like to make sure our whistleblower line is visible from this country, despite the fact we don't have any entity there. Is there any channel we could freely, I don't know, broadcast or advise on our
Perhaps
whistleblower?
Go ahead, Sandra. I was just
No,
thinking about our past project together in Uganda, Brazil, and also Vietnam.
yeah,
Sandra would like to draw from that. But yeah, go
yeah.
ahead.
No, feel free to elaborate on that in a minute. I just think the core issue that might already exist is the question whether this whistleblowing hotline is a proper mechanism to reach those people anyway. As we happen to experience that there are many of these 24/7 hotlines, which seem to be a quite easy fix for setting up a grievance mechanism. However, these are usually posters that are hanging somewhere in a factory compound, which I barely ever used. Because I think they're not close enough to the people who are really affected. And those might not even have a phone or the literacy level to use these hotlines or the trust that these hotlines are going to change anything, which is why we emphasize on why it is so important to involve the communities to find focal points which have this trust. And yeah, we did in fact had a project where we tried to identify so-called community facilitators or focal points, whatever you want to name them, which have been trained and which are respected members of the communities and are well known, and where the barrier of approaching them to raise any issue is much lower than picking up a phone and calling a 24/7 hotline, where you might have AI at the other end of the hotline and it's supposed to share any concerns. So I think the first step would be to think about what might be the proper channel or the mechanism to really get closer to the people that I want to reach. And maybe a hotline might not be the proper tool for that. But Riri, feel free to add to that.
Yeah. So I think channels is one thing, right? But making sure there is a sustained campaign over a period of time to change the behavior of people to be able to use that hotline is a different story, right? So but I think just to add on Sandra, the reason why Dayang is very interesting for Dayang to be here today is exactly that. If you ask a child in the deep plantation of palm oil in Sabah, if you do have problem, will you call the hotline of your company? Will you report to the company in any channel, suggestion box, 24 hours hotline, or reaching out to the HR or whoever? Or you will go to your teacher and say your problem. It's going to be the letter. Like these teachers of Humana teaching in the local schools, building a very close relationship with the undocumented stateless children, also their families, are mostly the go-to person that parents and their children are seeking help, on anything about their child nutrition, about the health situation of their parents. But perhaps Diane can share a bit more on that, on how Humana now becomes like the closest grievance channel that the workers and their parents are reaching out to. Diane?
Yeah. In for Humana teachers, okay, because all of our Humana teachers are living in the plantation area, which is they live closely with the community in the palm oil plantation area. So they are the person or the has become the central welfare officers, okay, where these children really trust the teachers. Not even the children, the parents also have a very high trust percentage to the teachers. So if there's any problem that happening, no matter what, like child labor or social issues or any family matters or sensitive issues, they will go to the teachers and tell about their problem and ask for the advice actually or seeking the help. So these teachers will go to the management, meaning to say to Humana's management, okay, and for the reporting. And also we go to the palm oil plantation, okay, to discuss what are we going to do with the problem that has been facing by these childrens. So there's some sensitive issues that we have been facing before, not only about the child labor, but also like sexual assault and the early marriage issues. So we've been doing this for a very long time. So I believe that there will be a person or parties or organization that these children, targeted children, will trust actually. So as what we have in the palm oil plantation area, we have our teachers, Humana teachers, that the children will go at the very first place.
Thank you so much. Now I would like to take a question that has been answered partially, I think, from Michael Plaza. So thank you for sharing. We're working with small scale farmers. They would not have an interest in reporting that their children are working on the farm. How can we establish a system in which we find out about cases where children are working and hazardous work? We do not have the capacities to set up people in the villages to provide a grievance channel. And we don't have a lot of resources to engage with NGO on an ongoing basis. Do you have an answer?
I do think, oh, Sandra, I saw you unmute yourself. Want to go first?
I'm fine either way, but I just wanted to point out that it's maybe important to emphasize that the grievance mechanism is nothing that is isolated from any other activities. So I agree that child labor has many reasons, and child labor in the context of family work or the small scale farmers, it has to do with the culture, it has to do with the economic situation. So there are many angles that need to be, or many layers that need to be addressed in order to avoid the child labor. And the grievance mechanism is just one tool to get more transparency into the situation. So only by having a grievance mechanism, I agree, most probably the parents are not going to be the one raising the concern that they ask their children to help on the farm. So that must go hand in hand also with the awareness rising of these farmers and farming communities of what the impact of child labor is and how this will affect the children also in the long term, and what the benefits of education are and what hazardous work means. So there might be other tasks on the family farms which children are fine to handle, but maybe, yeah, but not the dangerous one, not the camel kids, not the machete, whatever the English term is for that. So it also should go hand in hand with other activities, and that could also include awareness rising on a community level, where indeed these facilitators, focal points, could act as extended eyes and ears to give you more transparency on the actual conditions outside of any auditing mechanism, where indeed there's only someone coming from the outside and then leaving again and might not even see or face the child labor cases existing. Riri, over to you.
When I did, so Michael, when I did a human rights impact assessment in cocoa sector in Indonesia, we also found similar situation that all of these smallholder farmers are certified. I will not be naming the certification, but they're certified, and the farmers know about the logo of that certification. So when we ask question to them, like, if you do have problems, where do you get help? And then they will mention the head of village. Oh, I'll be reaching out to the field officer, if it's about productivity, getting more fertilizer and so on. But if it's the social issues, then usually we go to head of village, or many of them just saying, we don't go anywhere, we just take it in and deal with it, or do nothing with it and move on with our life, right? So that's what the small scale farmers will be saying. They will, even though they know that they know the logo, let's just say a red bottle, they know, oh, the logo is red bottle, yeah, we know that the red bottle is providing something for us that we can report. But when we check, have you ever reported anything? No, because in the agriculture community with small scale farmers, usually they will not even report their neighbor, because it's a neighbors. They will not report or complain, oh, in my neighbor they have this child labor, they're employing people there. They will not be doing that. So that kind of conventional grievance mechanism, which again, going back to my presentation, that was developed not in a well-intended manner, will not be happening in the context of agriculture, in the context of mining. It may work in the manufacturing sector, in the first tier factory, where many of the workers are so much educated. I've seen, for example, Amphori also have their Speak for Change system, for example, where they receive lots of cases through that complaint mechanism. They piloted that in India, in Vietnam, because the center is also a service provider for Amphori, and we did lots of investigation for Amphori. So we know that that system is functioning for the first tier factory thingy. For the lower tiers, not so much. However, in the agriculture sector, like you say, Michael, it's going to be very difficult to pull off similar thing in that context. That's why I understand that you do not have the capacity, you may not have the resources to continuously engage NGO on an ongoing basis to provide such channel, but there is really no easy fix to do this. Yeah, perhaps what I can suggest is that try to pilot in a smaller scale and see how that play out before you start investing it or scaling it up to a bigger one. Let's start small somewhere where you see the highest risk in your supply chain. Try to set up this community-based, because in agriculture, community-based work well. Usually we've seen this in cocoa, in coffee, in rattan, in sach supply chain, in natural stone, so if you then can see where you can pilot just small pilot projects, see for 1 year, 2 years, if you've seen some progress, that you start receiving more cases, you start your improving your visibility in your supply chain as well by doing that community-based intervention, then you can take it back to your company and start thinking if you want to scale it up or using that as a good practice. Or you can build a discussion with your buyer, like whether that, for the scaling up, then you can get more investor to it. I've seen some companies who also dragging their investors to also start chipping in funding to scale up some initiative on the ground. Like I said, CS Triple D is looking at business model. So if you can show that your business model needs to do some improvement related to remediation, then can really put a business case to that, to your investor, to your buyer, then perhaps you can get more support like beyond your own resources.
Thank you so much. If I may also, I would like to add one point that I think from the company perspective seems to me very important, is that also how you communicate with your suppliers about all these issues. So if you have in your contracts, if you have like zero child labor policies, if you have harsh fines if you find child labor, if you have penalties or exclusion, etc. This is all incentives for the suppliers to not report. So I think we also had some webinars about how to build good supplier relationships. I think the contracts, the phrasing in the contracts, the fines in the contract, try to make your contracts more on a collaboration level and less on a kind of you have to do what I want level, so that you get this trust. That is also very important to have discussions, and probably also changing the narrative, changing the language, showing that you want to be part of the solution and you don't want to get like this these cases just to protect yourself regarding compliance, etc., but you want to be part of the solution. I think is really important, and this is something that you have direct leverage on as a company person. You can decide on your buying practices, you can decide which purchasing practices you want to use. And I think this is also a big lever in different sectors. Now, it goes a bit in the comment of Olga saying that nobody would have an incentive to change unless they get compensated. I think this is the whole thing. We need to understand, okay, why are the children working, and if we take them out, what will be the compensation also for the parents? I was just looking. I think there are no, oh yeah, there was one question, but we just have 1 minute. This was from Thomas regarding how to conduct due diligence on the NGOs, how to choose which NGOs are good to work with. Do you have any tips, like sitting in Switzerland and wanting to work with an NGO somewhere in Asia, in Africa? Would you have any tip to how can you find the right one?
I think very quickly, Alice, I agree with what Jess replied. You know, that would be very good, you know, if you got a peer referral or work with an international organizations that you know already have a good, you know, like track record, you know, and working with companies. Because if you just work with any NGOs that have never worked with companies, they don't know how business is operating. That's going to be very challenging for you to manage later on. I think, Alice, just one thing, I saw a really important question from Olga actually very much early on, you know, where is a good place to embed remediation procedure for companies? Very quickly on that, Olga, I would suggest, based on our experience at the center, to keep your policy, code of conduct, policy documents very succinct, clear, and easy to understand. Like one or two sentence, simple, saying that, you know, like all child labor, forced labor cases needs to be remediated, la 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 la. Just one, two sentence that shows your commitment to it will be enough. But as a follow-up to that, usually we also suggest our clients to either come up with, they sometimes call it implementation manuals. Sometimes they call it guidelines on child labor and forced labor remediation, whatever they call it. But basically, it's a guiding document, that step-by-step process for your suppliers on how to remediate, with case studies, you know, with some scenarios that can be helpful for them. So keep your policy succinct, but still have that that hook, you know, basically in your policy, that it will be further explained and discussed in our implementation manual or in our you know, supplier guiding documents on child labor remediation and so on. So yeah, that would be a very quick response to that.
Thank you so much. So since we are now we have reached the end of the meeting, I would like to just tell everyone that you can send me your questions if you have further questions where you would like Sandra, Riri, or Dayang to answer. We're here for you to help. So please reach out, and I would like really to thank you so much to the three wonderful speakers. That was really interesting. And yeah, just ask also our audience if you could take 1 minute of your time after this meeting to just answer the very short satisfaction survey, so that we can know if you liked it, what we could do better. And with that, I would like to say thank you to everyone and wish you all a good evening in Asia, a good afternoon here in Europe, and see you soon. Goodbye.